Hi Paul, I'm Kalli Furtado. So I work at the Met Office. I've been there for 10 years or so, except for a few years that I spent at the Institute of Atmospheric Physics in Beijing as part of that. Most of my research focuses on model development, which means I'm interested in improving how we represent physical processes in the numerical models that we use to predict weather and climate at the Met Office. And within that, most of my research looks at how we handle the processes that were related to clouds and precipitation. And I'm particularly interested in how those processes affect our ability to predict large-scale atmospheric processes like the monsoons that affect Asia and North America, for example, in the summer months. I'm also the science lead for a work package in the Climate Science for Services project with China. So that is a research collaboration between the Met Office in the UK and UK universities and the Institute of Atmospheric Physics, where Wenxia works in Beijing, and the Chinese Meteorological Administration. And the aim for those organizations in that project is to really try to do the sort of underpinning climate science research that's needed to develop climate services that support climate resilient economic growth and climate resilience in general in China, and also working with China to apply that in other countries in the world as well.
Super, thanks.
Hello, I'm Wenxia Zhang, an associate professor in the Institute of Atmospheric Physics at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And my research mainly involves climate variability and climate change, focusing on the water cycle and rainfall extremes. I visited the UK Met Office for a year between 2019 and 2020 through the CSSP China project. And during my visit, I worked with a few UK scientists, and of course, including Kalli, to understand the change in rainfall variability and rainfall extremes under global warming. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And I'm Paul Motz, I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy here in the UK. Well, thanks very much for joining me today to kind of talk about the work that you're doing and the international aspects of that work in particular. So Kalli, to get us kind of going on this conversation, and a conversation that I probably know enough about to be dangerous from my background. Well, what was the problem that you were trying to address here? You sort of hinted at it a little bit in the introduction, didn't you?
Yeah. So the problem. Well, okay. So I suppose there's two levels for that. The overall problem that the project as a whole seeks to address is the provision of climate services and the development of new climate services. So that particularly in the support of sustainable growth, climate resilient growth in the countries that we're working with as part of the project. One of those countries and longest standing partner in that being China. So the aim is really to do the underpinning scientific research into the climate system, into the models that we use to predict the climate system, and then try to bring those improvements and that improved understanding through to climate services, which you could think of as in general as climate information, which can be used by organizations in societies to make decisions which are then climate resilient or take into consideration the potential effects that climate change might have on their operation.
So Wenxia, you said that actually in particular though, and that Kalli's kind of painted this wide picture, that actually some of this focused on the water cycle. And so why was it important that we focused on the water cycle, in this kind of improvement in climate models? Why is that important?
Because the water cycle is a very fundamental question in the context of climate change, because it is highly relevant to our daily life, such as floods and droughts, and also the reliability of water resources. So, so this, I think it needs to be well taken into account in adaptation planning. Yeah, and especially, you know, in recent years, we've seen lots of record-breaking extremes, such as the floods in China and Western Europe in last July, and that in Western US and Canada in last November. So these are causing lots of damage and losses to our society. So we definitely need to improve our understanding in the water cycle, and climate modeling is a very useful tool for that.
So Kalli, what's the challenge of getting it to rain in a climate model then? Is it the time, the intensity, the place? What is the challenge?
Yeah, so rain is one of the most, you could say, one of the most downstream predictions that we can get out of the model. So for the amount of rain that we predict at a particular location at a particular time is really, that's the end result of many different competing and interacting processes in the model. And most of those processes are to some degree maybe scientifically uncertain. Even if we're relatively sure about the basic physics of one of these processes that is related to rainfall, there's going to be some uncertainty that comes about just because we need to represent that in a simplified way in a model. And then the rainfall predictions that we get at the end are affected by the net result of all those different uncertainties combining and interacting with each other. So really, that one of the most significant challenges in rainfall research is to manage and handle those uncertainties. So to try to improve our understanding of rainfall processes so that we can get better predictions of the kind of quantities that you mentioned. So things like the intensity of rainfall when it happens, how long particular storms will last, where rainfall will occur in specific cases, and then also the question of how all those things might be modified when the climate system, if the climate system that they are in changes over time. So if the climate warms, how do all those different characteristics of rainfall processes adapt and respond to that?
So Wenxia, what's the challenge in the Chinese context for this? So Kalli's made, getting it to rain in climate models is a complex set of physics with a complex set of uncertainty. So what did you do in this project to sort of move that kind of ball onwards a little bit?
Well, so firstly, in terms of the condition in China, particular challenges for China is there are very complex dynamic systems affecting the rainfall in China, such as the large-scale monsoon systems and midwesterlies. So these different weather systems interact and makes the prediction more difficult. And what's more, the topography in China is very difficult, very complex. So that also adds difficulty to the prediction of rainfall. And what we are doing in this project is we look at a different aspect of water cycle and rainfall. Traditionally, when studying water cycle, we often look at the main state and extremes of rainfall. But in our research, we look at the variability of rainfall, which has long been overlooked. And the variability, it describes how the total rainfall is distributed from time to time. So, for example, how the rainfall varies day by day and month by month. So this this issue is very highly relevant to the reliability of water resources and the transitions between wet and dry extremes. So I think we provide a new perspective to understand the water cycle changes as the climate warms.
It's really interesting. So it's kind of moving to a view of variability, which actually, when we're looking at sustainability as an issue, whether it be in wind or wind power or the way that we use water in our natural ecosystems, that variability, I mean, the argument you're making is as important as looking at the extremes. There's a danger of looking at the extremes. Is it too dry? Is it too wet? But actually, there's a whole spectrum in between there around variability. And in China, you've got that kind of large scale, small scale interaction, which is quite classical. Kalli, what insights did this bring to the model from looking at this variability in this sort of way in this partnership?
So I mean, so assessing models in terms of the variability is something that it's something that we're not as good at going into in depth on as we are at, I mean, looking at the sort of typical characteristics of the model, the mean, looking at prediction of individual extremes. Those are things that we often, those are things that we routinely as a community will look at and focus on. And then this broader issue of how do you quantify variability on different scales? How do you pick out the quantities of that variability? How do you pick out the most important metrics to describe that variability, and then using those to assess models? And that's kind of the insight that we might really be able to draw, I think, in the future from work like Wenxia's, purely from a model improvement and evaluation point of view. It gives us maybe a extended set of tools for quantifying aspects of variability that might be important for hydrological cycle, for water cycle change, and some insight into the metrics that we might use to assess the model performance for those things.
Super, that's really clear. Yeah. So before we kind of get to what came out of all this, the impact of all this, because we've defined what the problem is. Just like to understand kind of a little bit about both of you, and clearly you've collaborated over a long period of time. Kalli, you went and worked in China. What was the nature of the international collaboration, and what drives you to do this sort of international collaboration? Wenxia.
So from the perspective of scientific research, the collaboration, it promotes the exchange of our knowledge and methodology in climate research, particularly regarding climate extremes and monsoons, which are the part of the focus of the CSSP China project, also, as climate change and the adaptation to it is a global issue, so we definitely need global views and global efforts on this.
Kalli, what about from your perspective? What drove you into this, and what did you get out of it?
I mean, one of the things that we really wanted to do when we set up these projects, and I mean, this one's been running for a long time, since 2014, I think, and one of the kind of founding principles of it was that we wanted to build long-term sustainable research cooperation with Chinese scientists in particular focused areas of climate research. So for me, I think that's something that I've always wanted to kind of see come out of the project over time, is the building of those relationships, increasing the interaction between the UK climate research community and equivalent communities of experts in China. So yeah, for me that's always been a kind of sort of a motivation for doing this project work. For me personally, I would say probably one of the best things that I've got out of working in the project is the ability or the opportunities to work in those networks, so to visit China, meet and work with people there, that's helped significantly to broaden my sort of horizons as a research scientist. It's given me some new perspectives at looking at things that I wouldn't have conceived previously, and it's given me a different, probably a different understanding of what the priorities of research should be, or what they can be, compared maybe to what I would have thought before. So I think that personally, that's probably the main thing that I've got out of it, is a broadening of my horizon and understanding as a scientist.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it, to be able to understand any scientific problem from different and alternative views in order to drive that. And if you're working on global climate modelling, the clues in the first word, it's global, and understanding and that local knowledge of the meteorological system and the challenges that are going to be essential. The other thing I pick out from that discussion is that you've actually been doing this a while. So how important has it been to have that sort of long-term collaboration, that building of understanding between, in a way, two organizations here internationally? Wenxia?
Our collaborations with Met Office, I think it has been many years, and for myself, it's also a few years, and this through this long-term process that I get to know what the strengths are in the UK institutes like Met Office, and the expertise in the Chinese institutes, so we can think of better ways to collaboration, and also our current collaboration creates more opportunities for future collaboration. And one good example is the Global Monsoon Model Intercomparison Project, which was jointly proposed by the Chinese and UK scientists under the framework of CMIP6, and it is aimed to promote our understanding of the global monsoon systems. So this example is just to show that we are, through the long-term collaboration, we are creating more platforms for a better interactions.
No, that's really important, isn't it? So what you're actually saying is, as the relationship deepens, and understanding deepens, you can actually grow further. And for those on the call, the Global Monsoon Program and CMIP is the Climate Model Intercomparison Program, where they compare these climate models together, and it's incredibly important as it feeds into the process where climate models are used to predict the future as part of the IPCC and therefore COP process as well. So this all feeds into that biggest picture. So let's turn to the impact of this work. Kalli, for all we've been talking about rainfall, water cycles, global models. What was the impact of the work in particular, from your perspective?
So the whole project of kind of the development of climate services is a sort of compared to a field like weather prediction, which is very mature, everybody knows what they want to get out of the weather forecast. The whole question of climate service development and provision is much broader than that. We talked about the amount of time that the project has been running for. Yes, that's a great investment of time, great for building the relationships and so on. But in terms of the timescale for really pulling through fundamental science to real impacts, it's actually quite a short timescale. So it's almost like you might think more in terms of what you would hope to achieve, I feel, still in longer term than picking up specific impacts or things that we've done so far. If you look at the kind of research that we're talking about at the moment today, for example, longer term, what we would really want to see, what I would want to see, is the development of these scientific ideas into things that are much more kind of useful or oriented towards practical decision making, either by government or private organisations or even individuals. That's kind of where we want to go.
So why just to explore that idea that you just put forward there, you know, about climate services being slightly more difficult as compared to like weather forecasting. Why is that? Why it kind of said the end is more difficult to quantify, you know, but yet it would seem to me
great question.
that climate services are actually going to be the essential part of an understandable, sustainable future. So you help me with that one a little bit.
Yeah, well, from my point of view, from my perspective, that's a really great question. That goes to the heart of the issue. I think I personally, what I think the issue there is that there is a gap between what people need in terms of climate services and what can be provided, and those are still two. There's still some gap there, really. I think there's quite significant gaps in some areas between the demand, what information people could actually use, and what information we can actually reasonably provide at the moment. So there's a kind of sort of knowledge gap element there, which we need to work on bridging. I'd say that then the other factor, or maybe this is sort of the other side of that, is that we really need to focus the research that we do in terms of the model improvements and the model developments that we prioritize. I think we are moving into a stage where we really need to now be focused on pursuing research avenues that are directly relevant to the kind of things people might or do want to use climate information for. And that maybe is the thing that, if we could strengthen that link, if we could consistently do research that was relevant to the needs of us users of climate information, then we would start to step over that knowledge gap, which is, I mean, how we ended up in a situation where we have good, reliable, useful weather forecasts is because we focused on making the models better in areas where, and improving human, you know, and also anything, the human elements of forecasting and everything, we're all very focused on particular user needs, which fortunately in the weather sphere are very easy to quantify.
They're fairly straightforward, aren't they? And I think that's the challenge for climate service. That is, but I think that's an interesting sort of pulling apart of, you know, getting the model and the information correct, but then the need to pull it through to as the name suggests, services, and that's a challenge, and there's still a gap there. Wenxia, from your perspective, is there a different perspective from the Chinese end of this about the challenge of delivering climate services?
Yeah, I fully agree with you that there's a gap between these two aspects. But what I want to say that the good thing is that I think it is the gap is now reducing, because we can see that from the latest IPCC Air6 reports that the working group 1 and working group 2, they have more kind of interactions in the reports. And also this CSSP China project with 5 different work packages, they brought scientists with different backgrounds and expertise together. So there are work packages working on climate dynamics, model development, and also climate services. So it provides a very good opportunity for scientists to communicate what is needed for climate service. So I think this is a very good start towards this issue.
Yeah, yes, I think that's right, isn't it? That closing that gap and understanding, you know, and talking to users is going to be an important part of that as well. So really, as we come to the end of this conversation, where's this going to go? I mean, it's been, as you say, it's been a long-term relationship. What are the next steps moving on? Because climate is a long-term, centennial, decadal type issue. So what are the next steps for the partnership and the collaboration in particular, Kalli?
I mean, so the real challenge for the partnership and the partnership level is to sustain and continue to build the links that we've already made the hard work of putting in place. So what we really need to do over the next 5 years, if you think we've kind of been running for 5 years, all you need to really think about in human terms for the next 5 years is how do we make sure that we build on and strengthen those relationships working relationships, and with keeping in mind that the kind of environment that we're going to be doing the next 5 years in is not the one that we did the last 5 years in. So China is in a very different position. The UK, to some extent, we're in a different position. We've learned a lot already from working with Chinese scientists, where maybe 5 years ago didn't have that background to the same extent. So it's how do we ensure those relationships in this changing environment? In practical terms, we really need to maintain, I think, going back to my previous answer almost, I think I would highlight that again, like we need to maintain this kind of focus on making models better, because they are our main tool in this area, one of our main tools in this area. And we always need to have in mind, I think, like what is the ultimate goal of making those models better. There needs to be a well-defined user question, motivation, kind of pulling on that.
Super. Wenxia, from your perspective, what's the next steps?
Yeah, I think in addition to maintain and strengthen our relationships, we should also recognize more urgent scientific problems that need to be coped with in the context of global warming, such as I mean, in addition to understanding the climate change, but also to find out solutions to tackle that, such as reducing the carbon emissions and realizing the carbon neutral targets, which requires global international actions and contributions from around the world.
Wow, great. Yes, a really big vision there, I think, which is quite important. Well, thank you very much, Kalli and Wenxia, for joining me this morning on this good development conversation around this. Really interested to learn about the climate science service partnership between the Met Office and the Chinese colleagues. I think it's been a really fascinating morning to think a little bit about how science and good models and climate can help us deliver that next generation of services in particular, and the understanding of users. But as Wenxia said absolutely beautifully, addressing probably some of the biggest challenges that we face as society, which is a sustainable, low carbon future. Thank you very much for joining me today.